Welcome in. This is a special episode of Destination Dynasty where we are going to start our rookie draft season here on DDFFB. Expect many more of these episodes coming where we will be drafting with our Discord community on our brand new mock draft simulator tool that we have over at ddfantasyfootball.com. That's what you see on the screen. If you want access, you can sign up for free where you are allowed to mock. If you want to be part of the community, $14.99 a month gets you in the door. It gets access to all of the tools, including the War tool, the Trinity tool, this mock draft tool, and then access to our Discord. So check that out if you want to mock with us. Many more of these episodes to come where we will be mocking with our community inside of the Discord and putting it up here on DDFFB. So excited for rookie draft season, rookie mock season that will take over the next 3 months. But today I'm going to do my own 3-round rookie mock draft where I go through this format, which is a 12-team Superflex Start 11, 1.75 tight end premium, and I'm going to add 0.15 point per carry. I just finished up the roster construction series. If you didn't listen to that, it was a 5-part series talking about optimal roster construction for a 12 by 11 Superflex with 1.75 tight end premium, sleeper default settings, and I added a third receiver. So really, if you want to sync that, look at my username, Charles Chill FFB, and pull up the roster construction series or the rookie mock series. That's what I'll be following along for this episode. So the rookie mock one, you can pull up and follow in real time. But here, I wanted to show the difference and go back to listen to those podcasts if you want to hear what this would sound like without the 0.15 point per carry. But I want to do a draft with the point per carry and with this tight end premium. Makes it a little more interesting in terms of my early take on the class, because I know people are not excited about the running backs. I'm putting this out before the Senior Bowl, so maybe that changes as we have probably 8 or 9 of the top potentially 15 or 16 running backs in the class at the Senior Bowl. So those are probably the guys that fill out the NERB on a 53, but I wanted to show the difference here looking at our War tool. I'm going to pull this league up on the War. So here I omitted quarterbacks only because quarterbacks really aren't fighting with the other positions for spots. But I want to just highlight the difference here when you have the 0.15 point per carry. And I'll remove the tight ends for now. We'll get to those here in just a second. But this is just factoring in the 0.15 point per carry. Look at how much higher the running backs are compared to the receivers. And that is just the density of the position across your starting lineup versus each other. So forget about what the curve looks like. But if you just factor in that we're starting 2 running backs here, that means we're pretty much looking all the way down to about here, RB24. That would be the cutoff. For receivers, we're looking all the way down to wide receiver 36, which is about right here. So this point right here, wide receiver 36, and this point right here, running back 24, is about where those core positional starters end. So you can see when you get to that point, the running backs are still higher than the wide receivers. And then all the way up here, literally position for position, all the way from RB1 to wide receiver 1, and then all the way down into the flexes. Running backs are strictly dominant over the receivers. That is the 0.15 point per carry. Now, you start to drop off, and this is total War for the season. So as it follows the logic, running backs, there's not as many of them per week as there are receivers. So you see the running back War start to dip as you get down here because there's a lot of running backs that are only contributing a couple weeks. They get positive War during those weeks, but they're negative in the other weeks. Whereas receivers, the scoring is a lot more flat. Most receivers that average 10 points a game for the season, rarely are they ever at a spot where they're just getting significantly negative War. Maybe they have some bad games, but even their bad games are 6 points, 8 points. Then they have some good games that balances it out. But that's the 0.15 point per carry. If you're in a point per carry league, this is why you continue to draft running backs. Because here's the cool thing. Even if a running back starts way down here and they're almost off the screen, they're off the screen. But then in a given week, you slot them in up here. This is why they are a better flex than a receiver. You may not be able to predict where that is, but there's a reason that you would take a bunch of running backs, and that's simply because they are more dominant in those flexes as you get up here. So let's go over to this scoring matrix. This is something that I use pretty commonly, talking about how to consider each position and their density in the flex. So I've highlighted based on the roster construction series, as you can see, this density I call it density because that tells you how much of each spot on average those positions contribute. So here you can see that the running back RB2s and the wide receiver 2s, they're very similar. Running backs versus wide receiver 3s, a little more for the RBs, but not much. And then when you get into the flexes, it's pretty much between 6.3 and 7.4% for all your flexes. But here is the data that shows you in the flexes, running backs and receivers are pretty equal. Really, the tight ends creep in there. I'll go back to the war here to show the tight ends. But in a non-point per carry league, really all three positions in this format are pretty equal. So let's compare tight ends on the screen. So with tight ends, you're only starting one. So when you get to right here, that's the cutoff at tight end. Everything below that is still just a flex in the tight end spot. So basically you go all the way down. You're really comparing these guys. So tight end 13 at 0.59 and tight end 18 at 0.39. So really just call it somewhere around 0.4-ish. Those guys are actually getting compared to these receivers down here, which you can see are right around 0.4 and below. So blow for blow, those tight end 2s are just as good of flexes as the wide receivers. Now, I already talked about the running backs when they creep into this range. All they need is to be active, to be getting touches. And that's where the running back war is going to pop up and be higher. So when you think about war and you think about this format, I just wanted to go through that before we start mocking. So now let's get to the mock. So we're going to do a 3-round mock draft. And we're going to go through and we're going to try to consider what these look like from a practical standpoint right now. We don't have a ton of information on the players other than their profiles. Projected draft capital, we're still working on that. Senior Bowl data, don't have that yet. Combine data, we don't have that yet. So obviously the player names will change. And I'm going to rip through these pretty quickly, but I just kind of want to talk through the reason why I'm targeting certain positions in certain spots based on my opinions of this class right now. So we're going to start 101 in this format. Jeremiah Love is a clear 101. It doesn't really matter if you need a running back or not. Like, he is the clear 101. He's probably one of the, I'd say, 12 most valuable assets in the league. You could debate how many quarterbacks are valued over him, but if he's RB 4, 5, 6 in Dynasty, he's probably worth just as much as the elite tight ends. So any running back that comes in like Genty did last year, or Jeremiah Love is this year, like, he is a smash 101. The 101 here in this format is worth so much more than pretty much everybody else. He is worth 3 times as much as the 103, 4, 5, probably double what the 102 is worth. So just consider that if you're in a point per carry, how much more valuable he is than all of the other picks. 102, given the running back scoring, I don't want to say it devalues receiver, but you have to really be convicted on one of these receivers being elite. If they're just really good, if they're just wide receiver 2s, like, they're not worth the difference of taking a quarterback. So Fernando Mendoza is the pick at 102. I think he's a very clear 101 in the NFL draft. He's the only quarterback that we can project right now to go in the top, 15 picks. Maybe somebody sneaks in there, but just very, very clearly the 102 in this format, given the devaluation of receivers. 103 through 105, I honestly don't think it's that big of a deal, depending on who you want to pick. I'll put Carnell Tate at 103. Ray's talked about him as he thinks he's the best receiver in the draft. I would probably go with Mekhi Lemon, who I'm going to go at 104, but you're splitting hairs. In this format, the receivers are a little devalued, so I would be willing to shop these picks because I do think these 3 receivers are seen as a clear tier above everybody else. I've seen a lot of creators say basically 105 is their tier break. Now, they're probably referring to just straight PPR with maybe a small tight end premium, but usually that's the lens that folks are talking about when they talk about tier breaks. So those 3 receivers should be the clear top 3. Now, here's where it gets tricky with the 106, because one thing that I've talked about quite a bit is that these picks, when you're trying to value how the league looks at the 106 versus what the projected draft capital and positional value of this draft has for the 106. It's really league to league. If I knew right now who the quarterback 2 was going to be and I knew where they would get drafted, I'd probably opt for that over anybody else. Now, I'm not exactly sure if Ty Simpson is going to go in the first round, but if I'm betting that he does, I'm taking him here even over the RB2, simply because I don't think the RB2 goes maybe even in the third round. We might get a running back or two in the third round, but that's where you're talking about the same level last year as like Caleb Johnson, but not as much excitement, right? Caleb Johnson was somebody people thought should go in the second. He fell to the third. He already had that steam, and he would probably be a smash RB2 in this class, especially given the draft capital he got last year. That still might be higher than what we see in the RB2 this year. So I'm going to go Ty Simpson 106. This is a bet that Ty Simpson goes in the first round. If Ty Simpson doesn't go in the first round, then you just remove this pick. 107, you could entertain another quarterback if you thought there would be another first round quarterback. I'm going to bet that there is not going to be. So now you have to make the decision between, okay, is there going to be a first round tight end? And we talked a little bit about the tight end premium. A tight end does not have to be clearly top 5 or top 7 or top 10 here to be worth their weight. You're comparing tight ends, even if they're not top 12, to other receiver flexes. Because of the premium, it pushes them up. So I don't have to be absolutely right on the tight end. It doesn't have to be, well, I'm not drafting a tight end unless I know they're going to be a difference maker. I don't need a difference maker here. I just need somebody that if they settle in and they just are something between, I'm trying to think of a good comparison that we've seen just recently. Say Chiga Okonkwo over his first 4 years and Dalton Kincaid. Somewhere in between. I can live with that because that gives me at least a viable flex in this format. If I get better than that, and I definitely have heard people say that they think Kenyon Sadiq is better than that, it's actually a higher floor pick than you would think given the premium. Now, you may be disappointed if he doesn't become what Harold Fannin has become or something of that nature, but I don't have to be absolutely right to feel comfortable making this pick. So I'm going to go Kenyon Sadiq at the 107. That stems from the fact that I do think he's going to be a first round pick. And if he doesn't get that capital, then you have to probably evaluate his landing spot. But even so, even if he goes in the second, it's still a pretty strong pick in this format. So no more tight ends. We're probably going to go next to receivers. And here's where you're probably determining, do you think the receivers are going to get first round capital? And I think there's probably 2 receivers that have a pretty good chance of getting first round capital. The first is KC Concepcion. I've seen some polarizing takes on him, but I do think he goes in the first round, given how much positional value the receivers have. And I'm not going to probably take a RB on a 53. And if you told me there would be a running back that went early third, they went to a spot where they're immediately going to get opportunity to start, I could live with that because I do think there's plenty of receivers that could end up in the flex range or could be knocking on the door of, a wide receiver 3 or even a wide receiver 2 on the team. Those aren't that hard to hit on. Running backs that even end up with a rookie year like Woody Marks last year are very valuable here. I just don't want to use this pick while there's still a little bias that there's a first round receiver on the board. So I'm going to follow that same rule here for the 109. We're going to get back to that with Denzel Boston. So Denzel Boston is the pick. I think there's a less chance that he goes in the first than KC Concepcion, but even if he's in the high second, that high second round range is a sweet spot for receivers as well, because people will immediately attach that receiver as probably on a team that needs one. And the reason that I still consider like top 40 receivers as first round picks, or at least rookie first round pick candidates, is because those receivers typically are going to teams that could have drafted a receiver in the first. But because receivers are not a premier position to take in the top 2, 3, 4, 5 picks of a rookie draft, teams typically don't take them. I mean, you have to be really, really special to go at the 4th pick as a receiver, 5th pick. I mean, Jamar Chase went there. Jamar Chase went 5th overall. You saw Marvin Harrison where he went. Like, it has to be a prospect that people just view as cannot miss And so typically the first receiver comes off the board outside of the top 5, which means teams in that second round are looking at receivers and like, well, there's probably 1 or 2 or 3 available that we would have taken in the 20s, but we're only picking at the high first and then in the high second. So I'm going to consider second round receivers that get that capital to basically be first round receiver profiles. So I know that's a lot of words, but that's a reason that I always say like top 40 picks for receivers, not top 50, not second round. It is because those teams typically don't deem it valuable to take a receiver with the 101, with the 102, with the 103. It has to be an absolute slam dunk, like Jeremiah Smith level slam dunk before you're going to say, I'm going to take one there. But they usually treat those guys in the early second like first round picks. So I think there's going to be one more. And the reason I'm doing this is not necessarily because I think this is the best pick, but I think that this is how the ADP is going to shake out. And I think all of these 3 receivers that I just took between Concepcion, Boston, and Branch are all going to go in that range between pick 25 and pick 40. And they will be viewed as first round profile receivers. Now, back to the Sadiq pick. I do think there is a tier break at the 105. You can consider that a hard tier break, and it's probably a soft tier break at 106 or 107. Simply because if you're at 106 or 107, you're going to get the choice of whatever's left. It could be Sadiq. It could be another quarterback. It could be the best of whoever the wide receiver 4 is. You get your choice. So I value that 106 and 107 a little bit higher than the 108, 109, 110, and the rest of the first round picks, simply because you may not have the positional choices there. You might just have to go, well, that guy was a first round pick. I have to take him there, similar to Matthew Golden last year. And I'd rather be in the position where I could choose. So it's probably a hard tier break at 105. 106 and 107 is probably more like a soft tier break. Then you get just, I'm drafting first round profiles after that. So now the draft gets interesting. Now you're starting to think about the format more. This is where the point per carry comes into play. This is where ADV comes into play. This is where sentiment comes into play. What can I do with these players? And I'll try to work this in, even though it's kind of hard without an actual draft board. Any of the picks past we'll give the wild card to that 106. But really, any picks at the 106 and beyond, I would take a 27 first for. Just straight up, I don't want to make this pick. Maybe it's a league where you know you're not picking a quarterback. Maybe it's a league where the premium says it's one thing, but your tight end market doesn't reflect that. Any pick 106 and beyond, I'm taking a 27 first. A late one, a mid one of a team that's made the playoffs a couple straight years, I don't care. Even if I have to add a third, add a late second, it doesn't matter. The goal is getting that transaction done where I don't have to make the pick. So we're down out of the receiver range where I think any of them go top 40. Quarterbacks, consideration here, Trinidad Chambliss. I do think people like him. People are starving for another quarterback in this class. And I do think if he's in the range where a team drafts him, I hate to use like he's Tyler Shuck, but if he's in the range, if he gets drafted in the second round, I remember doing this research a couple years ago, quarterbacks that are drafted in the top 48, so the first half of the second round, similar theory to receiver here. When a team takes a quarterback in the second, especially the top 50 or better, typically they give him a shot. Now, is it the same as getting first round draft capital? No. But typically those guys get a look. They get 8 games. They get a season. They maybe get more than a season. Davis Mills got more than a season. Will Levis got more than a season. Tyler Shuck is going to get more than a season. Those are examples of guys that go in the second, but because there was still investment in them, teams are willing to give them an extended look. Now, it's a little riskier here, given how good the 27 quarterback class could be. But I do think somebody takes Chambliss in the second with the thought of, hey, we're going to give him an opportunity this year. Maybe that's 8 games, 10 games, the whole season. I don't know. But it's not going to preclude us from taking a quarterback next year, but it's basically sink or swim. And I like those bets with quarterbacks. Basically, Chambliss is tasked with, hey, you get the team to say 6 wins. If you can get the team there, like Tyler Shuck did this year, you've actually staved off your own competition in next year's draft. Doesn't mean a team couldn't take a quarterback at 12 or Saints are picking 8 this year. They could take a quarterback in a strong class, but you have some maneuvering to do if you're going to do that. So the logic just isn't as strong to say they're absolutely taking one. If he starts and they go 3-14 and they're picking second overall next year, he's in trouble. He's dug his own grave at that point. So he's the 111, and I do think there's more quarterbacks that we'll take, but we'll save the theory as to why we take them for a little bit later. So now receivers are kind of cooked at this point, unless you think there's another that's going to go in the top 50. We'll go back to receivers here, but now we're going to focus on running backs. And this is where, to me, there's a blend of the format, draft capital, sentiment, ADV, profile. And obviously those things are still not enough to just say, absolutely, I know this running back's going to get opportunity and they're going to be good, because landing spot ultimately determines that. So 112, we're just going to rip through, and you may have opinions on different players that are in this range, but we're just going to rip through a bunch of running backs, and I'm just going to pick them in the order that I think lead to this format. So these guys literally for me are in the same tier. Jonah Coleman at 112, probably projected to go somewhere in the mid-third, early to mid-third. And then we're going to go Jatarian Price, same thing. Both those guys projected to go here. They would be my RB2 and RB3, especially in a point per carry. Both fit this format very well. 202, I'm going to make an exception here, only because this player has been on people's radar. I do think he does not get the same draft capital as the two previous to him, but we're going to go to Nick Singleton. There are still people that think Nick Singleton is the RB2 in the class. His capital is probably a little lower. We're probably looking at more like a late third, early fourth round pick there for him. I'm going to lean into it continually after this and take more running backs. His teammate, Kaytron Allen, probably does not get as good a capital as Singleton, but probably, from what people have said, is better for this specific format if he does seize a role. So we're going to go Kaytron Allen here at the 203. And then one more, probably have to take Emmett Johnson off the board. I know Ray's not been super high on Emmett Johnson, but he does probably get third round capital. Like, he's going to get drafted in the same range as his other guys. And given the format, we're going to lock him in. So we're going to lock in 5 straight running backs from the 112 to the 204. And this, again, is drafting based on the point per carry format. You're probably not going to see many boards around this time in mocks that have this many running backs going here. In fact, if you put together a mock, people would just ignore the point per carry and they would just start taking the running backs that they like, or the receivers that they like. And the reason I didn't do that is because there are plenty of them still to draft. So now that I think there's a tier break at running back here, I have to start coming up with some narratives as to why these running backs, or why these receivers. What separates a receiver that's drafted in the mid-second to one that's drafted in the early third when I don't know their situation? I can look up their profiles. I can kind of think about what people will do if they get drafted in this range to a spot that they like. And that's the angle that I'm going to work here. And I may be a little out of pocket with this pick, but I'm actually going to go with Chris Bell. I think Chris Bell still gets day 2 capital, maybe even capital closer to the other receivers that I've taken. But here's the angle with Chris Bell. Depending on where he goes, there's going to be this suspended value with him because he had an injury, tore his ACL late in the season. So he's one of those guys where a bad training camp or preseason isn't really going to hurt him because he's not going to be playing. He's probably going to be redshirted. At least you're not going to see much of him probably until maybe mid-season. Maybe he's ready to practice during training camp, but it feels like a lot of people had him end of the first, early second, before the injury. And so you get a slight discount on that. But the fact is, he's kind of got to build an excuse. And I like that built-in excuse argument for ADV. So this is probably a controversial pick, but I'm going to take him there. And then I'm going to go through with the receivers, and you can look at the receivers that are still available. Our ADP, just based on likability. Now, this is based on, I think, 76 mock drafts have been done since I recorded this. So we've had 76 actual mock drafts here. So this ADP is reflective of that. I'm going to go with Elijah Surratt next. I think after the college football playoff, people are really excited about him. being one of those receivers that seen a couple people say that he's in their top 5. And then same thing with Omar Cooper, another one that people really, really like. So I'm going to lock in the 2 Indiana receivers there simply based on the fact that people like both those guys. I still think both of those guys potentially go in the top 75 picks. I think Surratt goes in the 2nd round, but I think both of them are pretty likable. So I'm going to take them off the board. Next up, I'm going to go with one more receiver here, and that's Jeremy Bernard. I've seen some polarizing takes on Bernard, meaning a lot of people don't know if he has much of a ceiling, maybe be a little bit limited in the NFL, but what does that actually mean? I'm drafting an Alabama receiver that's going to get 2nd round draft capital here, and I'll just bank. People drafted John Mechie in the late 2nd, and it kind of feels like the same type of argument, right? Like Bernard's been in college for a couple years, doesn't have the greatest profile, arguably didn't stand out amongst the other Alabama receivers. They had 4 good receivers this year. So he's kind of just there, but I'm going to bank on the fact that this has been a place that's produced a lot of receivers, and it tends to be where people typically pick them. So 208, we're at kind of another tier break, and you could almost look at, if you don't have an appetite for a running back, that this draft, and here's, I think, the takeaway with the tiers, right? I talked about the tiers from 106 and beyond. When you get to the late 1st and the first couple picks of the 2nd, based on the format, it makes the most sense to draft running backs. Now, you may look at that run of Coleman, Price, Singleton, Allen, and Johnson and go, are you kidding me? I just used a late 1st, early 2nd on a running back that's basically a mystery box. Why don't I go trade for a running back? And I've been doing that. I've been sending out deals for running backs. Can I get DeAndre Swift? Can I get Travis Etienne? Can I get Javonte Williams? Can I get those types of running backs? And I don't even have to necessarily pay these picks. But when you start comparing them one for one, I would be willing to do that. The reason you wouldn't is because your league may prefer the sexiness of an unknown rookie pick. But certainly, if you can go lean into the format, any of these 4 picks right here, 205 and beyond, if I can go out to the market and find whatever running backs you think you can craft a narrative for, Tyler Algier, Brian Robinson, Rashad White, Tyrone Tracy, Tajay Spears, Kenneth Gainwell, there's guys that are free agents, there's guys that aren't, but you can craft the narrative. And in this format, probably from 205 and beyond, if I can get any running back that is getting regular touches, when I say regular touches, maybe 8 opportunities or more a game, and I can project that for the next year or 2, I'm comfortable doing that and fading a lot of these receivers, because we're going to draft some more receivers. We're going to draft kind of some more hopium players here going forward, but I'm willing to lean towards just going for running back production. I'm willing to trade those picks. If other people want to convert a guy like Tyrone Tracy into a pick or Tajay Spears into a pick, I'll be doing a running back podcast here in a couple weeks where I'll kind of break through all my targets. But early on, if you like a running back, go get him. You're not missing anything. Even if you hit on Omar Cooper and he's a flex receiver, if he's a wide receiver 3, the only thing you missed on is the ability to flip him when somebody really likes him. But that's it. It's the opportunity cost of being able to trade him for more. So we're going to pivot. 209, we're going to start leaning back into the format, and we're going to go with a couple tight ends off the board. Eli Stowers is the tight end 2 for a lot of people, so we are going to take him off the board, and then we are going to follow that by taking Ohio State tight end Max Clare. Both those guys, I think, get drafted on day 2. Right now, both are projected to be late 2nd, early to mid 3rd picks in this year's NFL draft. Curious, because if you go down to our ADP and you just look at the top players that are available still, quarterbacks, we'll get to those here in a second. 3rd round's probably the place where you can start striking on some quarterbacks, maybe a little bit earlier, depending on your build. Running backs, there's plenty of running backs. Damon Claiborne was the other one that I didn't mention. I put him in a tier below a few of the others that I've already taken, but you know what? We might as well take him off the board here because we went a long way without a running back, and clearly, if you're fishing for running backs in this range, it's probably worth picking one here based on projected draft capital. He's probably projected to go 4th round. A little polarizing, but probably have to take him off the board based on the format here. And then at the 212, here's where if you just go down to the ADP and look, there's another 10 running backs that I'm interested in. Now, some of these are going to settle out. Mike Washington, Jam Miller, Adam Randall, Seth McGowan, like all these guys are going to be at the Senior Bowl. you're probably going to be able to leave Mobile having a little more conviction on who you like and who you don't like in this range. But as you can see in the ADP, all of these guys are basically just getting picked in the third where people like them. I have my guys that I like. Others have theirs that they like, but there's probably another 8 running backs that we'll take, and you have to based on the format. But I'm not convicted enough to say I have to get this one here. So I'm going to pass. We're going to go back to the receiver well. Looking at projected draft capital right now, we have, what do we have off the board? 10 receivers off the board so far. And again, like this is an ugly stretch right here. This is probably the range of the draft where I want to make the picks the least relative to the market. Because even if all I get is a year of like Tajay Spears giving me 11 PPR points a game, in a point per carry, that's probably going to look more like 13 and a half. And I'd rather have that than just draft one of these receivers here. But people still like receivers. Even in point per carry formats, people will still go back to receivers. So I think there are 2 other receivers that have to go off the board. And then we're probably done taking them. And that may be a hot take, but we're going to go Chris Brazzell. Still projected to be a second round pick. And then next up, we are going to go with Jacoby Lane. Another projected second round pick. So we're going to lock those 2 guys in on our board. This might be controversial, but I'm not going to take any more receivers. No more. And there's going to be some that get pumped up or pushed up. Skylar Bell, Malachi Fields, Antonio Williams, Brennan Thompson, Deion Burks. You could push any of these guys up based on opinion, but I'm done taking receiver. So now we're just going to focus on positional scarcity going forward, or positional value based on the format. So tight ends, looking back at the ADP, I think Trigg and Delp and Endries and Jolie, you could probably take any of those guys. I'm going to pass on the tight ends. But obviously, if any of these guys get capital where you're like, okay, third round capital, currently go look at projections for the rest of the tight ends besides the 3 that I've already taken. I do wonder if people will push these guys up a little bit. You could probably justify taking those guys. I just don't know exactly my opinions between the guys right now. So if I had to pick, I'd probably just take one that's my opinion on who I like the most. I'd probably leave Endries of the 4. You could also go with Trigg if you wanted the, potential conversion receiver to tight end that we've seen before. But I'm just going to pass. But I do think in this format, if you hit on a flex tight end, it's a better use of a pick than probably even the receivers. But I don't think people necessarily view tight ends that way. They'll say, oh, that's a 4th round tight end. They probably don't land in a depth chart that's super great. They're not going to be a difference maker, so they won't take them. But I do think there's a blind spot, and this will probably be a draft that if I'm stuck making 3rd round picks in a format like this, it's going to be tight ends, it's going to be quarterbacks, or it's going to be running backs. Let's go back to the running back well. This is where I'm going to start ripping off some of the running backs that, just based on the format, I like. So we'll go with Mike Washington. We will go with, and I'm mostly focusing on players here that are probably going to get day 3 capital somewhere in, let's call it mid 4th to early 6th. So we'll go Mike Washington. We'll go Adam Randall. Find some of these guys on here. Adam Randall. Lock him in. Opinions on some of these guys may vary. Again, we'll get some clarity after the Senior Bowl. Le'Veon Moss, that was a guy that 2 years ago people were super, super high on coming in. So we'll lock him in. Got to pick my boy Seth McGowan. And again, I don't necessarily care about the prototypes of these running backs. They're any RB on a 53, and if they get drafted in this range, it's very similar to last year where there were a ton of guys that got picked in this range. Ollie Gordon, Trevor Etienne, Jaden Blue. There's a ton of them. And I'm not saying that these guys are better, but they represent the exact same thing. So we'll lock in Seth McGowan. See any others that are probably projected to go in this range. Jam Miller, got to lock him in as an Alabama running back. We'll throw him in there. Jamari Taylor, I think, may go a little bit lower, but you know what? We're going to lock the Indiana guys in there too. And we'll throw Jamari Taylor in there as well. And again, like I don't have distinct opinions on a lot of these prospects. So you may be sitting here going, there's no way I'd take this guy. There's no way I'd take that guy. Again, I'm just trying to focus on the format. This is a point per carry league. Even if one of these guys starts as the RB3 on their depth chart, think like Taz Brooks from last year, barely played. All you need to do is get a little more opportunity, but he doesn't even need to have a role. He just needs to have a couple weeks where he's usable. And I'd rather do that because it preserves the type of build that I would have here rather than just, you know what, I'm going to take who I like. And you'll hear that described a lot. Heck, we talk about that all the time. This is just get your guy season. Well, here I'm not just trying to get my guy because I'll be honest, I don't have a lot of conviction on players outside of the top 5 or 6 players. It's too early. That's not my expertise. I'm waiting to get more information to form opinions on some of these guys. But even so, when you're talking players in the second or third round, it's almost all ADV. It's almost all like what profile will other people like? And then what landing spot will other people like? So we have 4 picks left. This is where lean back into the any quarterback on a 2 deep. We're going to go with Carson Beck. I think he has to be a definite pick. Probably a 3rd round pick. I think him or Nussmeier could sneak into the second. You know, just depending on how high the other quarterbacks get pushed up. Obviously, if Chambliss doesn't go until later in the second or early third, it's unlikely that I think these guys get drafted higher than them, but I got to lock them off because they probably go in the top 3 rounds. The rest of the quarterbacks, like you could sell me on why Cade Klubnik, you could sell me on why Drew Aller, you could sell me on why Talon Green, probably Diego Pavia. I know people will like Diego Pavia wherever he goes. I think I'm going to go Drew Aller just because he feels like one that somebody is going to get. Kind of feels like Quinn Ewers last year. And he's probably a little better in terms of like physical gifts than Quinn Ewers. But he just feels like a guy that goes early day 3 and somebody's intrigued. I'm not saying it's Joe Milton, but it does kind of feel Joe Milton-esque. If he lands in the right spot, especially if he can tell themselves a story where he has a good OC or a good head coach, like I think he will not go outside of the top 3 rounds. And then last pick, man, part of me wants to just take a tight end just because I think there will be another tight end that goes off the board. I just don't have any conviction, but I'm going to go, you know what? If I had to pick, this is the one that I need to do a little more research on, but I'm going to go Jack Andrews. And this just represents, I do think another tight end will go in rookie drafts. So that's a placeholder. He might not be your tight end 4. He might not even be your tight end 7. But there is the final board. So we have a total of 6 quarterbacks drafted. I think in 3 rounds, that's pretty comfortable. And people will go, why the hell did you take Beck, Nussmeier, and Aller? Well, if they get the capital they're projected, they're probably backups. They're slotted in to be backups. Are they the backup day 1? I don't know. But I'm willing to take those guys with picks rather than go back to the receiver well. You notice in the last round, tons of non-receivers. And so we have a running back at 101. We don't have another one until 112. Then we have 5 more in round 2. And then we rip off a bunch of them in round 3. Probably over half your 3rd round should be running backs. So a total of, I think, 14 running backs got drafted here. So 6 quarterbacks. We had 14 running backs off the board. Tight ends, we went 4. I think that's probably a pretty adequate reflection, maybe a little higher, depending on combines, usually huge for tight ends because we get to see testing numbers. And given how good last year's tight end class was, there will be people looking for the next Gadsden, the next Gunnar Helm, the next Terrence Ferguson. There'll be a lot of people chasing those because they don't necessarily see the roster construction theory between taking a running back and taking a tight end. But here we took 4 tight ends. So that leaves us with what? 12 receivers, I believe. Tate, Lemon, Tyson, clear tier break. Concepcion, Boston, Branch, clear tier break. And then 12 receivers. And honestly, once you get to this range, I don't even need to take any more. The market likes receivers, but for the format, I don't really love them. So there's our mock. Kind of this what's in my mind right now in this specific format. So we're going to do some different formats inside the Discord where I won't be making all the picks. It's actually tough to make all the picks yourself because I haven't really fully formed my opinions on these players yet. I'm really trying to draft structurally here based on the format, based on projected draft capital, based on a lot of the mystery box items, landing spot, combine testing, hype from Mobile. None of those things have happened yet. So that will form opinions on a lot of the non-locked in players. And again, that could start mid first round this year, late first round. That's why people say it's not a great class. The number of players, like right now, if I had to look at this board, these are the 10 players that have a shot to get drafted in the first round, pretty much. And I'm guessing there's not going to be 6 receivers in the first. So we are looking at an all-time low number of players that go in the first, skill players. All-time low. In the last decade, there has never been less than 10. And even to get to 10 here, we need to get Ty Simpson or another quarterback in the first, and we need to get 6 receivers in the first. That is how bad this class is. That is why this class isn't great. It doesn't mean that we're going to look back in 3 years and say this class was guaranteed to suck. In fact, given how devalued a lot of people view the picks, it might be better to take some shots, especially in the running back class, because people think, oh, the running back class sucks, but who cares? If it's a 3rd round pick, all you're looking for is a running back that gives you a couple spot starts. If you end up hitting on a Kyron Williams or a Chase Brown, like you're smashing. If you end up hitting on even a guy like Isaiah Pacheco, or if you hit on Tyler Algier, that's a smash. You're just a guy that's on a depth chart that gets multiple years of opportunity. That's huge. And that's not that far off of what you could find this year in their 3rd round versus any year. So I don't devalue these picks for what they are. I don't devalue the tight ends for what they are. If I'm just shooting for cheap flexes, running backs and tight ends are probably the spot to focus on with a lot of these picks after the mid-second and beyond. So opinions will change, but hopefully this was helpful if you're in a point per carry draft or a 0.75 tight end premium draft. And you can see the way that I talked about this receiver class, it's not a great receiver class. Not for a format like this. Sure, you get the guys at the top, but then immediately here, we're already into 2nd round potential receivers. And then it's just get your guy. And in this format, like, I don't want to go get my guy at receiver unless I have a very specific plan. If I'm drafting Chris Brazzell at 212, I need to have a plan of why I'm taking him there. Is that a guy I'm going to flip? Is that a guy other people like? Is that a guy that got a lot of buzz in, the combine or whatever it might be? Like, there's still so many unknown narratives that I really tried to draft structurally here. So I'm rambling on. Hopefully this was helpful. We're going to be doing these mocks every week inside the community where I will be mocking with our community members. And we'll go through and we'll talk through some of the picks, and I'll record those, and those will be some of the mock draft contents that we put up on the DDFFB YouTube page. But I wanted to put one out following the roster construction series to talk through the point per carry element and how that changes with this format. So with that, like and subscribe, tune into all the content. If you want to see more me and the others on the channel, become a Trades and Chill member. It's $3.99 a month. You get the Trinity Weekly Show with Ray and I, and you get the Dynasty Deal Show with Shane, myself, and Ty every Friday. Those are members-only shows that you get them live or early based on if you're a member or not, and then they go over to the regular feed after a couple of days. So with that, I will sign off. Hope you enjoyed this mock. If you're not already in there, jump into the community so you can mock with us, ddfantasyfootball.com. And until next time, be chill.